Welcome to this deep dive. And today we're exploring autism spectrum disorders, ASD.
Mhm.
We'll be using excerpts from a book called Theory of Mind and the Triad of Perspectives on Autism and Asperger Syndrome by Olga Bogdashina.
Okay.
And I have to say, getting ready for this, I realized how much my own understanding of autism has been shaped by,
Yeah.
I guess, the outside view, the clinical labels.
Mm.
So our mission today is to really understand autism
Yeah.
from the inside out, through the lens of those who live it every day.
Yeah, it's a crucial shift in perspective.
Yeah.
Instead of asking what's wrong,
Mm-hmm.
we can start asking what's going on here,
Mm-hmm.
and that opens up a whole new way of seeing the world.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we often hear about the Triad of Impairments,
Right.
social interaction, communication, and imagination.
Yeah.
These are central to diagnoses,
Mhm.
like in the ICD-10 and DSM.
Right.
But I'm already sensing from the book that there's
Yeah.
a lot more beneath the surface,
Yeah. You're right. Those tools are helpful for identifying autism, but they mainly focus on what we observe, like the outward behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
It's like describing a car by its color and shape
Yeah.
without understanding the engine underneath.
Okay, so instead of just seeing those outward behaviors,
Yep.
we're going to try and understand the engine,
I-
what makes it run differently.
Yeah, actually. And that's where the book's concept of SDAPs comes in. It stands for Systems of Thinking, Abilities, Perceptions, and Senses.
Okay.
It flips the script and encourages us to see things like sensory sensitivities, not just as symptoms, but as adaptations.
Adaptations to what exactly? What's the environment that these adaptations are for?
That's where understanding sensory experience becomes absolutely key.
Mm-hmm.
The book really hammers this home. For many autistic individuals, the world is perceived very differently because of how sensory input is processed. It's like having the volume turned up way too high on all your senses all the time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay, so it's not just a matter of preference or being picky.
right.
It's a fundamental difference in how the world is experienced.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that difference plays out in a few key ways.
Okay.
The book talks about figure ground distinction. That's the ability to separate what's important from the background noise, so to speak. Imagine trying to find your keys in a messy room where everything seems equally prominent.
Okay.
That's kind of what it can feel like for someone with difficulty in figure ground distinction.
Wow, that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
It suddenly makes it so much clearer
Yeah.
why things that wouldn't bother me could be totally overwhelming for someone else.
Exactly.
Wow.
Then there's fragmented perception. It's like seeing the pieces of a puzzle,
Mm-hmm.
but struggling to put them together to get the big picture.
Okay.
Think about social situations. If you're only picking up on isolated details, it's hard to grasp the overall context or follow the flow of conversation.
Oh, so social interaction becomes like trying to follow a movie
Yeah,
where you keep missing key scenes. No wonder it can be so difficult.
exactly. And then there's distorted perception. Sensations can be delayed, inconsistent, or just plain distorted.
Mm.
Imagine a world where sounds are jumbled. Lights flicker unpredictably, and touch feels different every time. That unpredictability can make even simple tasks feel like a challenge.
Yeah, it makes you realize how much we take for granted
Right.
in terms of our senses being reliable.
Right.
The book also mentioned something called monoprocessing, but it didn't really explain it in much detail.
Ah, yes, monoprocessing.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Imagine having to consciously switch your attention between seeing, hearing, and feeling instead of experiencing them all at once.
Okay.
And it's like your brain can only handle one sensory channel at a time to avoid overload.
So it's like having to manually switch between tabs on your computer
Exactly.
instead of having them all open and accessible at the same time.
That's a fantastic way to put it. And some people develop strategies like peripheral perception to cope. They might avoid direct eye contact, for example, because it's too intense, but they're still taking in information from their peripheral vision.
Okay, that's blowing my mind a little.
Yeah.
It makes you realize how much we assume about how other people are experiencing the world.
Right. And this is just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
These differences in sensory perception and processing are fundamental to understanding so much else about the autistic experience.
Well, I am definitely hooked. We've covered a lot of ground already, and I feel like I'm just starting to grasp the depth of this.
And we're just getting started. There's so much more to explore in terms of how these sensory differences connect to abilities, thinking styles, and even those repetitive behaviors we often see.
I've always wondered about those repetitive behaviors.
Yeah.
They're often called stimming. right? It seems like there's a lot of misunderstanding around that.
Absolutely. And that's a great place to pick up our conversation next time. We'll delve into how stimming can actually be a crucial adaptation for managing that intense sensory world we've been discussing.
That sounds good. Okay, so last time we were starting to unpack how differently the world can feel from an artistic perspective. You were about to explain stimming, those repetitive behaviors we sometimes see. It sounds like there's more to it than meets the eye.
Definitely. Think of stimming as a way to regulate that intense sensory input we talked about. It could be anything from rocking flapping hands to repeating phrases, or even just focusing intensely on a specific texture. It's not just random, it serves a purpose.
So it's like a pressure valve release when the sensory world gets too overwhelming.
That's a good way to think about it. Stimming can help filter out overwhelming sensations, reduce anxiety, or even just provide a sense of comfort and control in a world that can feel unpredictable.
That makes so much sense. I guess the key is understanding what function that particular stim is serving for that individual.
Absolutely. Instead of viewing it as something to be suppressed or eliminated, we should be asking, what need is this behavior meeting? Once we understand the function, we can work on finding alternative ways to meet that need, especially if the current stim is disruptive or harmful.
It's like figuring out the root cause of a problem
Yeah.
instead of just treating the symptoms.
Precisely. Now, remember how we talked about differences in sensory perception leading to different abilities and ways of thinking?
Right.
It's not just about deficits. It's about recognizing the incredible strengths that can come from those differences.
So someone who might struggle with social cues
Yeah,
could be exceptionally talented in, say, music or math.
exactly. Those skills often stem from the same differences in perception and processing that can create challenges in other areas. Think about someone with a heightened sense of detail and a laser-like focus. Those traits could make them exceptional at coding or visual art or even scientific research. The book even mentions savant skills, which are those extraordinary abilities in specific areas that we sometimes see in autistic individuals.
It's like their brains are wired for excellence in these specific domains, while other areas might pose more challenges.
Precisely. And it's not just about specific skills. Autistic individuals often have unique ways of thinking and problem solving. They might see patterns that others miss or come up with innovative solutions because they're not bound by conventional thinking.
So it's about valuing those different ways of thinking, not just trying to fit everyone into the same box.
Absolutely. And that brings us to a really important point about empathy. There's this misconception that autistic individuals lack empathy, but the book challenges that notion.
Yeah, I can see where that misconception comes from,
Yeah.
given the difficulties with social interaction and communication. But you're saying it's more nuanced than that.
Much more, empathy is about understanding another person's perspective. And that can be difficult for anyone when you're not experiencing the world in the same way. Remember those differences in sensory perception and processing we talked about? Those can create a significant barrier to understanding each other's emotional responses and social cues.
So it's not about a lack of caring.
Right.
It's a difference in how empathy is expressed and understood.
Exactly. And that's where clear communication becomes so important. Both autistic and non-autistic individuals need to be willing to put in the effort to bridge that communication gap. It's like learning to speak each other's language.
And that language includes more than just words, right? It's about paying attention to body language, tone of voice, and all those subtle nuances of social interaction.
Precisely. And it requires patience and a willingness to be flexible in our communication styles.
Okay, this is all making so much sense, but I have to admit, I'm still a bit fuzzy on how those perceptual differences we talked about earlier, like figure ground distinction and fragmented perception, actually play out in everyday life. Can you give some examples?
Of course.
Yeah.
Imagine a crowded, noisy environment like a shopping mall. For someone with heightened sensory sensitivities and difficulty with figure ground distinction, that environment can be utterly overwhelming.
Yeah.
Every sound, every visual detail, every smell, all compete for attention, making it nearly impossible to focus on any one thing.
That's a really vivid picture.
Yeah.
Makes you realize how easily sensory overload can happen.
Exactly. And then consider someone with fragmented perception trying to make sense of a social situation. They might hyperfocus on a particular detail, like a person's shoes, and miss crucial social cues, like facial expressions or body language.
So it's like they're missing crucial pieces of the social puzzle.
Right.
No wonder it can lead to misunderstandings and misinterpretations.
Precisely. And remember distorted perception. Imagine trying to hold a conversation when sounds are coming in delayed or out of sync, or when touch feels unpredictable. It can make even simple interactions feel incredibly disorienting.
Yeah, I'm realizing that a lot of my own assumptions about social interaction are based on the idea that everyone's perceiving the world in pretty much the same way. This is really challenging that assumption.
And that's a great example of how exploring the autistic perspective can broaden our understanding of human experience as a whole. It encourages us to be more mindful, more curious, and more compassionate in our interactions with everyone.
Well, my mind is definitely blown wide open. This conversation has been so enlightening, but I feel like we've just scratched the surface. What else does the book have to say about navigating social interaction from an autistic perspective?
Let's delve into how autistic individuals often develop different social strategies and communication styles to cope with the challenges they face. And these strategies, while they might not always align with typical social norms, are perfectly logical from their perspective.
I'm all ears. Tell me more about these different social strategies and communication styles.
Well, think about it. If the social world feels like a chaotic, unpredictable place, it makes sense to create a sense of order and predictability. Many autistic individuals do this by developing a set of routines and rituals.
So it's like creating a personal rule book for social interaction, a way to make sense of a world that can feel confusing and overwhelming.
Exactly. These routines might involve specific ways of greeting people, saying goodbye, or engaging conversation. They might have a particular order for doing things, or they might need to have certain objects arranged in a specific way to feel comfortable.
So while these routines might seem unusual to those of us who navigate social situations more intuitively, they serve a very important purpose for the autistic individual.
Precisely. And it's important to respect those routines and to avoid disrupting them unnecessarily. For example, if someone insists on saying goodbye in a specific way, it's helpful to accommodate that preference rather than trying to force them to do it differently.
That makes sense. It's about honoring their need for predictability and control in a world that can often feel unpredictable and overwhelming.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that their communication style might be different, but it's no less valid or meaningful. They might be more direct and literal in their communication, which can sometimes be perceived as blunt or insensitive.
So they might say exactly what they're thinking without sugarcoating or filtering their words.
Precisely. And while this can sometimes lead to misunderstandings, it can also be incredibly refreshing and honest. Autistic individuals often value authenticity and sincerity, and they appreciate those same qualities in others.
So it's about learning to appreciate their straightforwardness and their genuine desire to connect.
Absolutely. And it's about recognizing that just because someone doesn't follow typical social conventions, it doesn't mean they're not interested in connecting. They might just be doing it in a way that's more comfortable and meaningful for them.
This is so insightful. It's making me realize how much I rely on unspoken social cues and expectations.
And that's one of the biggest challenges in communication between autistic and non-autistic individuals. We're often operating with different sets of social rules, and those differences can lead to misinterpretations and misunderstandings.
So how can we bridge that gap and create more effective communication?
Well, one key is to be more explicit in our communication. Instead of relying on hints or subtle cues, state your intentions clearly and directly.
So instead of saying it's getting late,
Yeah.
we might say, I need to leave by 9:00 p.m.
Exactly. And be patient in explaining social rules and expectations. Autistic individuals might not pick up on these things intuitively, so clear and concise explanations can be incredibly helpful.
It's like providing a social script that they can follow a way to navigate those unspoken rules of social interaction.
Precisely. And it's also important to be mindful of sensory sensitivities. Avoid loud noises, bright lights, strong scents, or other sensory stimuli that might be overwhelming.
So creating a calm and predictable environment can make a big difference in their ability to communicate effectively.
Absolutely. And above all, approach the interaction with a genuine desire to connect and understand. Autistic individuals are often very perceptive and insightful, and they have a lot to offer if we're willing to listen and learn.
Wow, this conversation has been so eye-opening. I feel like I'm just starting to grasp the complexity of the autistic experience and how much we can all learn from embracing neurodiversity.
And we've only just begun to explore the many facets of this topic. Next time, we'll delve into the concept of theory of mind and how differences in perspective can sometimes lead to challenges in understanding each other's thoughts, feelings, and intentions.
Last time we were talking about how autistic individuals often develop, different social strategies and communication styles. It's fascinating how what might seem unusual to us is totally logical, when you understand the sensory and perceptual differences we've been exploring.
Exactly. And that leads us perfectly into the concept of theory of mind,
Okay.
which the book spends a lot of time on.
Okay.
It's basically the ability to understand that other people have their own thoughts, feelings, and intentions, which might be different from our own.
Okay, so it's like being able to imagine what it's like to be in someone else's shoes, to see the world from their perspective.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this ability is crucial for social interaction. It allows us to predict how someone might react, to understand why they might be behaving a certain way, to avoid accidentally offending them. All those things that make up the intricate dance of human relationships.
Yeah, it sounds like a superpower. And
Right.
the book is suggesting that autistic individuals might have a harder time with this.
Well, research suggests that many autistic individuals do find theory of mind challenging.
Okay.
It's not that they don't care about other people's feelings.
Right.
It's that they might have difficulty understanding and predicting those feelings because they're not experiencing the world in the same way.
So going back to our earlier discussion, if someone is struggling with fragmented perception, focusing on details rather than the big picture,
Yeah,
it makes sense that they might miss those subtle social cues that tell us how someone is feeling.
exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine trying to understand a movie when you only see a few frames here and there. You're
Yeah.
missing the overall context, the emotional nuances, the flow of the story. It's like that with social interaction when theory of mind is a challenge.
Okay, that makes it so much clearer. So it's not about a lack of empathy.
Right.
It's a difference in how easily they can put themselves in another person's shoes.
Exactly. And this can lead to a lot of misunderstandings and misinterpretations, which
Yeah.
can make social interaction feel really tricky. Imagine accidentally violating a social rule you didn't even know existed. It can create a lot of anxiety and uncertainty.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So what can we do to be more supportive and understanding in those situations?
First and foremost, remember that these difficulties are not intentional.
Right.
It's not about being deliberately rude or inconsiderate. So much of what we do socially is automatic for most people, but for someone struggling with theory of mind, it's like having to consciously think through every step of a dance that others do effortlessly.
So instead of getting frustrated or judging their behavior,
Yeah.
we should be patient and try to see things from their perspective.
Exactly. And clear communication is key. Be explicit about your intentions, explain social rules and expectations, avoid sarcasm or idioms, all those things we talked about earlier. It's like providing a social script that can help them navigate those tricky situations.
And create a safe and supportive environment where they feel comfortable asking questions and making mistakes without fear of judgment.
Absolutely. Now, the book also talks about something really interesting called double empathy. It challenges the traditional view the burden of adapting lies solely on the autistic individual.
Oh, I remember you mentioned this last time.
Yeah.
I'm really intrigued by this concept.
The idea is that communication difficulties arise not just from differences within the autistic individual, but from a lack of shared understanding between autistic and non-autistic people. It's like two cultures trying to communicate without a common language.
So it's not just about the autistic person needing to learn our ways.
Right.
It's about everyone being more aware of those differences and working together to bridge that gap.
Exactly. It's a two-way street.
Yeah.
Non-autistic people need to be just as willing to learn about autistic communication styles and make an effort to understand their perspective.
That's a powerful shift in thinking. So instead of seeing it as a deficit within the individual,
Yeah.
we're recognizing the role that social context and expectations play in creating these communication challenges.
Precisely. And this applies not just to individuals, but to society as a whole. The book challenges us to think about how we can create a world that's more accommodating and inclusive for autistic individuals, not by trying to fix them, but by valuing their unique perspectives and contributions.
Okay, I'm ready for that challenge. Where do we even start?
Well, one area is education. Traditional classrooms can be a sensory nightmare for many autistic students, with fluorescent lights, unpredictable noises, and constant social demands. Imagine trying to learn in a setting that feels like a constant assault on your senses.
Yeah, no wonder so many autistic students struggle in those environments.
Exactly. But the book highlights some great solutions. Things like individualized learning plans, sensory breaks, flexible seating arrangements. All these can make a huge difference. And just as important is training for educators on autism awareness and sensitivity.
It's about creating a learning environment that's truly inclusive, where everyone feels safe, respected, and supported in reaching their full potential.
Precisely. And it's not just about education. It's about employment, healthcare, social spaces, every aspect of life. We need to be asking, how can we make this space more welcoming and accessible for neurodiverse individuals?
So things like clear signage, quiet spaces, sensory-friendly events, and even just a general awareness and acceptance of different communication styles.
Exactly. And it's about challenging those underlying assumptions that difference equals deficit. Autistic individuals bring so much to the table: innovative thinking, attention to detail, a strong sense of justice. And when we create a society that values those strengths, we all benefit.
Wow, this has been such a mind-expanding conversation. I
Hmm.
feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of autism, and I'm leaving with a real sense of hope for the future.
Me too. Yeah. And remember, this is just the beginning. The more we learn about autism, the more we realize how much we still don't know.
Oh,
But the journey itself is incredibly rewarding, and the more we embrace neurodiversity, the richer and more vibrant our world will become.
that's a beautiful thought to end on. Thanks for taking us on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure. And to everyone listening, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep challenging those assumptions. The world needs your unique perspective.